to open the November 18th meeting of the City of Santa Barbara Planning Commission. Ms. Rodriguez, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Schwartz.
Here.
Commissioner Lodge.
Here.
Commissioner Larson.
Here.
Commissioner Jordan.
Here.
Commissioner Jacobs. Commissioner Jostes. Commissioner Bartlett.
Chair. I'm here, Chair.
I meant to say cheers.
Anyway. All right. Preliminary matters. Our first action item would be review of our minutes and resolutions, and we have draft minutes for November 4th, 2010. Are there any comments from the Commission on those? Ms. Lodge.
Mr. Chair, thank you. There was a very minor typo that I told Ms. Rodriguez about, and that has been corrected.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I have not typos, but I just want to chat briefly about some editorial comment. And so it'd be at the bottom of page 2 in the last paragraph, third line from the bottom, and where it says it was agreed that having more meetings were more important or making changes to the CUP. I don't know that we agreed that, and I certainly didn't. I would prefer that it said it was discussed that having more meetings or making changes to the CUP, and then the word would be replaced, may not help also, because I was certainly of the stance that I would like to see changes to the CUP, but the advice was that that was not a thing to do, and that also I thought the changes to the CUP could lead to improvements. So if those two words were agreeable, to change agreed to discussed, and after CUP to say would to may, I would respectfully request that those revisions be made.
Do others have comments to those changes? They seem appropriate to me, so okay. Any other comments to the minutes? I have comments on page 3, the Commission recommendations, the third bullet down. I was trying to understand really the meaning of the word offload. It just seems like an odd choice of words. If anybody else recalls what that comment was that just to relieve some of the pressure off of Casa Esperanza? Was that the intent of offload? Okay. And also there was a request, this is relative to the last comment under the Casa Esperanza discussion item. I did have a request from Commissioner Schwartz that she was interested in being on the council subcommittee, and Danny, I think you and I talked about it as to when would be the appropriate time to appoint people, so if you could enlighten us as to what's transpiring at the city council level on that.
Thank you, Chair Bartlett. I spoke to Sue Gray, who's the city's or staff representative, and what she told me was that it's the subcommittee is council members only, so it's not that they have requested or are appointing anyone from any other bodies to be on that committee with them. If the Planning Commission wanted to appoint a liaison and have that liaison attend those meetings and give input as requested by the committee, that would be appropriate. And there are two ways you could go about it. One is just to appoint someone now, or because I don't think I'm not sure they're going to be meeting before the beginning of next year, and it might be best to hold off. Hold off on appointing until we do all the next year's liaisons and such. But because I was out the last 2 days, I wasn't able to follow up to see whether they were actually going to have any meetings this year. What I could do is once we get going, I can go out and ask, and then I can have some information for you at the administrative agenda at the end.
Okay, that would be good. I think it would be more appropriate to do the appointment in January, unless you find out otherwise that there's going to be interim meetings, and then at least we could alert the people that are interested to stay involved until we do that official appointment in January. So.
Okay, yeah, like I said, I'll try to find out during this meeting.
Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think maybe it would be really appropriate to wait until January because we may have changes on the Planning Commission as well, and we'd have to reappoint if we had somebody moving along or, it just makes more sense to do it in January, I think, procedurally, don't you? Thanks.
Sure. Great. Okay. Any other comments to the minutes? I know, Ms. Jacobs, you just came in. We were in the midst of reviewing the minutes of November 4th, so I'm not sure if you had anything to add on that.
I would be abstaining.
Okay. All right. I'd be looking for a motion for approval of the minutes as amended.
Second?
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain?
Abstain.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Cato, are there any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items?
No, there are not.
About announcements and appeals?
Nope.
None. Okay, with that, I will open public comment. This is for items that are not on today's agenda, so if you have any other topic, I will open up for 2 minutes each. Seeing no one come forward, I'll close public comment and we'll go to our first item, which is a consent item for 2102 Edgewater Way. And Kelly Broadison is our planner, and if it pleases the commission, I would accept a motion to waive the staff report unless somebody really wants to hear the entire report.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Is there any public comment relative to this first item, 2102 Edgewater Way? Okay. Close public comment, bring it back to the commission for questions, and then we'll go into comments. Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my only comment for the applicant is as a follow-up to brief discussion at our site visit. So if the applicant could step forward. There's a representative, the property owner. Thank you. And you're the architect? Okay, great, thanks. There was mention in our package of a pool and then details around proposed pool equipment location, but I understand that the pool now has been eliminated from the project. Is that confirmed? That's correct. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, that was my only question.
Great. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really, again, the only question I have is a pretty simple one, and that's that, and we talked about this briefly on Tuesday, and I'm okay with you. I'm going to talk to Ms. Broadison. Thanks. And it's that corner faux sidewalk envisioned, and we talked about that going all the way up Oliver. There are no sidewalks all the way up to Cliff Drive on that side of the street, and as you go west through the neighborhood, the next 3 blocks, there are absolutely no sidewalks until you get to the west side of Medcliff, save for that one poor house on the bluff in the next block that was asked to put in a sidewalk in front of their house improvement several years ago. And I'm just wondering, are there assurances when a person makes an improvement like this and they're running down through the public right-of-way that the next set of improvements, or at some time, they won't have to come back and put in a sidewalk and take out those improvements? Because it seems clear to me that there's never going to be, never is a long time, but there certainly not in my lifetime is going to be sidewalks in this neighborhood. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about if that just stays there and sticks out like a sore thumb, but it doesn't represent a threat to the applicant, or if it should.
Bartlett and Commissioner Jordan, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, it seems to me that the way it looks there now, there's always the potential that someone may come along and say they're going to put a sidewalk in. And is that an accurate statement, and will that continue in the future?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Commissioner Jordan, do you mean someone being the city? The city might come in and put in a sidewalk?
Or the city may require that at the next addition on that particular parcel. That's the only property in the whole neighborhood going to the west that has any semblance of a sidewalk in front of it. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
And so I guess I'm sensitive to the fact that at some point in an improvement, even though we've had this conversation that it's just one property rather than a subdivision,
Right.
but at some point in an improvement or a set of improvements, does the fact that there's already an existing corner improvement there that goes nowhere, either direction, west or north, place a potential threat or burden on that property for the rest of its life? Or can it make improvements out into the public right-of-way like all the other houses in the neighborhood?
I understand. So there's Yes, there's always a risk when people make improvements in the public right of way. There's always the risk that the city will come in and say, you have to get rid of those because we're going to put in a sidewalk. Now, I don't believe that this area is even on the infill sidewalk program. You know, it might be. If it is, it's low priority because it's not really infill. Infill is usually places where there's little gaps here and there. But I don't know if you recall the Medcliff subdivision, but the property next door to this Medcliff subdivision had made improvements in the right of way, and that property owner, I mean, they had to remove all that stuff, or they're they're going through this process, but they will be required to remove all their improvements because that's all that's just taking a big chance from a property owner standpoint.
Okay, so the answer to the question is there's no assurance, obviously.
Correct. No assurance.
Okay. Thanks.
Mr.
Chair.
Vincent has his light on.
Yes, I'd be happy to kind of speak to this issue just more from the Commission's general knowledge. Once a right-of-way is dedicated, that right-of-way, it functions like an easement. It functions like a private easement. And the fee owner of that property is subject to the rights of the easement holder. In the case of a public right-of-way, the public, represented by the city, are the holders of those rights, of those easement rights for use of the right-of-way for public street purposes, which include sidewalks, parkways, and the street improvements. There is a process where property owners who wish to encroach upon the public right-of-way may request and obtain an encroachment permit from the Public Works Department. One of the conditions of that encroachment permit is an acknowledgement by the property owner that if and when the community finds a need to use the public right-of-way for public purposes, those improvements will have to be removed at the property owner's expense with no payment by the city. So that's how it balances out the primary interest in the public right-of-way or the public easement is the public purposes of a road and the public improvements that go along with roads. And so in one respect, any improvements taken by a property owner within the public right-of-way is essentially at their risk.
Great, thanks for the clarification. Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Chair Bartlett. I thought that the design and the match with the property were quite attractive and in keeping with the neighborhood. As we drove around the neighborhood, I drove around the neighborhood, I saw many remodels that were very much in keeping with the style of this one. Looks like high-quality remodels are happening on the Mesa, and this will certainly be one of them. I'm ready to make a motion to approve it. It is not asking for any modifications, and so I don't find any reason to ask for any particular extras into the package. It's a nice design, no mods. It's within all of the requirements of the city, and I would be willing to move that we make the findings for the coastal development permit if there are other questions from the commission, that would be fine, but at such time, I'd be happy to make that motion.
Okay, well, there are other lights on. Let's go to those, and then we'll come back to you for the motion. Ms. Schwartz.
I'll defer to Ms. Larson, and then I'll come back to my comments. She has the light on this.
Oh, okay.
I'll put it back on. Just a quick question. Are there any Cobra heads involved? I have this tiny set of prints, so I can't tell if there's street light around. Is there none? Okay, great. Thank you.
And your light is still on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to support Commissioner Jacobs' comments and suggestion for a motion, and also add that I was pleased to see the supporting comments from the nearby neighbors. So that assisted me in developing a further level of comfort in terms of this being appropriate in every regard, in terms of fitting in with the overall neighborhood compatibility as well as size, bulk, and scale. So with that, I'm ready also to support the project.
Great, thank you. And then I have one question that I would like to pose to staff or legal counsel, more on procedure. I was baffled in reading the staff report, especially on page 4 in the middle of the page, where it states that one board member, this is the Single Family Design Board, opposed the project, stating that it's not compatible with the neighborhood, and yet in the letter submitted by the same person, it says, I'm a member of the Single Family Design Board, and I also own property near the project at 2102 Edgewater Way, so I will not be voting when it comes to the Single Family Design Board. So we have it both ways, and it shows up also in the Single Family Design Board minutes that's part of our package, so something seems amiss. I'm not understanding how they can participate on the Single Family Design Board and then write the letter stating they're a neighbor and not participating. So, Mr. Vincent.
Mr. Chair, I can't explain that other than the fact that maybe the board member, out of an abundance of caution, or decided later, even though she may not be strictly prohibited from participating, she elected to abstain ultimately. I don't know. I mean, any of you may not show up one day to a commission meeting. So I can't speak to whether or not she's strictly prohibited by the Political Reform Act from or conflicted from participating, but then just decided not to participate on her own accord. So,
Okay.
But
it just seemed contradictory. So,
yes.
Great. So, Ms. Jacobs, I'm ready for your motion.
Okay, let's do it. I make the motion that the Planning Commission make the findings for the coastal development permit, that we make the findings that the property is in compliance, and that the neighborhood compatibility findings are also made, and we approve the project.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, Chair, just if you wouldn't mind adding that subject to the conditions.
Subject to the conditions of approval as outlined in the staff report.
Okay.
Second.
Great. All right. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. You have a project. It is appealable within 10 days. Thank you very much. Our next item is also a consent item, and this is 163 La Jolla Drive. And our case planner is Allison DeBusk. And again, if there's the desire on the commission to waive the staff report, I would look forward to a motion.
So moved.
Ms. Jacobs, your light was still on, or, oh, okay.
So move.
Okay. Do you care to second then?
I made the motion.
Oh, okay. You'll second. Okay. Great. Great. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries, so we'll waive the staff report. Any public comment relative to this item, 163 La Jolla? Or if the applicant chooses to add anything else, otherwise I'll bring it back for public comment. Okay.
Mr.
Nope.
Chair?
Yes, Mr.
Just before
Jordan.
this goes any farther, I'd just like to disclose, after your last question, that this particular property is half of a street width out of my 500-foot circle of close to my residence, and I did query both the city attorney and the FPPC, and am comfortable with their reply and support that I participate in this particular decision.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, seeing no public comment, I'll bring it back to the commission for questions and then comments. Ms. Schwartz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some questions. The first may be to staff. It pertains to Exhibit G, the applicable general plan and local coastal plan policies. I'm wondering if under seismic safety dash safety element, is it customary for us to continue to use this formula, the Seacliff retreat formula, 8 inches per year, which appears, if I'm reading this language correctly, to have been established in 1978? It's a simplified formula. Is that correct, Ms. DeBusk?
Chair Bartlett and Commissioner Schwartz, that is correct. It is something that was also reviewed with the Plan Santa Barbara EIR, and so any updated formulas would be used for the future. This is a simplified formula, and as you may have seen in the geologic report for this project, the rate of retreat was much less than that average, and so they did their own formula to calculate that for this specific project site.
Okay, very good. Thank you. My next set of questions are for the property owner or the applicant representative. Let's start with landscape architecture.
Philip Suding, landscape architect.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Suding. There, in our package, we have various recommendations as to how to treat the backyard area in terms of the surface covering, what's been done by the property owner to date, vulnerabilities that we have with lawns so close to Seacliff settings, etc. And specifically in John Green's notes, I'm not sure if you have this document.
I've reviewed it.
Okay, the engineering geology site assessment. Under other notes and suggestions, paragraph B, there's a recommendation, I believe, for installation of roof gutters and downspouts to empty the driveway, etc. I won't read this whole paragraph. It's really 2 sentences long. I'm wondering if you have any clarification or comments for us on the property owner's consideration of this recommendation.
The proposed project
Yes.
routes all of the roof runoff to the front bioretention swale that is being proposed.
Yes.
And then out to storm drain or gutter. So none of the roof water goes to the rear of the property any longer.
Okay.
As proposed.
Okay,
100% of it would go towards the front.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Then I would like to continue on. I think it's the Frank J. Kenton letter, December 18th, 2007. So the grass was removed, gopher netting installed, and then new grass sod in 2004. This is to control the burrowing rodents, which we know is a problem along our cliff sides, up and down the mesa area. Could you confirm and update us whether or not it's the property owner's intent to, if allowed, to continue with the sod that's there today?
They would retain the gopher netting, the metal gopher netting. I observed in several locations where it is still intact. It is galvanized wire, so it is, and I did not see any evidence of any burrowing animals, so it is still working as intended.
Okay.
And if burrowing animals did show up, I know that the owner would get right on them and get rid of them because he's as much concerned about this area as anybody else would be.
Okay. It mentions also in this letter that the grass lawn provides soil covering during rainstorms, and I know that's a plus. At the same time, there are often some concerns, and I think some of the commissioners may have commented on this at our site visit, of planting lawns so close to a very vulnerable cliffside. So I'm wondering if you have any, there's been any further discussion with your client about consideration of removing the lawn and planting something that would still strengthen that area and prevent runoff, but perhaps wouldn't be as moisture-laden, so to speak.
I've had extensive conversations with the owner about it, and as you've seen in the report, the existing lawn has been in place for approximately 45 years, and there has been no bluff retreat since 1965, and that was measured from the southwest corner of the house, and that's in the Cosino report, geological report. Also, this, I know that you look at each property on a case-by-case basis. I don't know if it was made evident to you that this is a little bit of a different geologic formation in that most geologic formations tilt towards the tide. Here's the tide, most tilt like this. This one happens to tilt like that. So the impervious surface below grade sort of directs the water away from the tide, and that's also mentioned a bit in the report. Additionally, we're removing the first 18 inches of lawn that adjoins the bluff, so that's a reduction of about 34%. And then in the front, we're reducing that by 81%. Also, if I may, we're going to specify a smart moisture detecting irrigation controller. That would be an approximate reduction of 50% of the amount of irrigation water that is applied to that lawn. So right there, you've taken a lot of that hydraulic loading away from the lawn, and the lawn isn't contributing to that. The current owner, he already turns off the irrigation and has been doing so for ever since he's owned the property. He turns it off in the wintertime or in the cooler months when we don't have as much evapotranspiration. We're also using a very drought tolerant plant palette throughout the property, more drought tolerant than it is now. Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions.
Great, thanks. Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Chair Bartlett. I am going to talk a little bit more about the bluff top planting. And this is as much for staff as for the applicant. As recently as just a few years ago, irrigating a bluff top was something that the Planning Commission pretty much never recommended. That, maybe never is the wrong word, but it was strongly discouraged that what we would usually condition would be temporary and removable irrigation that would be in place until the new landscaping was established, and then that irrigation would be removed and the native palette of plants would self-sustain based on naturally occurring water. Has something changed?
Chair Bartlett and Commissioner Jacobs, that is still something that staff does on a regular basis. It's also something the Planning Commission has done. In this case, because the lawn had been existing for so long, and due to the size and scope of the project, staff didn't recommend it, although we did give that as an advisory to the applicant that is something that the Commission has done in the past and may do for this particular project.
Well, I would ask my fellow commissioners to consider it. It certainly would be consistent with Planning and Staff Commission recommendations of the past to encourage the applicant to plant a drought-resistant palette of plants and to install temporary irrigation that would be in place until the plants are established, and then that irrigation is removed such that the bluff top is protected. I understand the lawn is a wonderful thing, and having a lawn replaced by something different is perhaps a less luxurious event for the homeowner, but when a bluff top fails, it's everyone's problem. And as we think about the larger civic issue, that's why we generally don't encourage lawns and lawn watering on a bluff top. Now, sometimes there's a little bit of a balance where a certain square footage of lawn is identified, and then around that is the drought-tolerant landscaping with the temporary establishing watering, and then that's removed. So there can be a balance of it. Excuse me. But generally, a large expanse of lawn that spills right out to the edge is not advisable. So I would be not supportive of that kind of landscape plan, and I would defer to the other commissioners to see if there is any feeling for or against a change in the description of what the landscaping, only on the bluff top. The actual lot for the house is large, but that's because it goes all the way down to the beach and is mostly unusable. The usable part of the property is being very fully developed, including an encroachment into the setback. So there's a lot of building going on. You're going to be using up most of your square footage on what is buildable. And so I would like to know that the landscaping is very carefully planned out. And that's why I'm asking.
Chair Bartlett, if I may respond to Commissioner Jacobs.
Briefly, and then we're going to discuss this item.
All right. As I did state before, I know that you guys look at this, each project on a case-by-case basis, and this is a little bit different than maybe all the past ones that you said no lawn. This is not a vertical bluff. This is a bluff that lays back at about a 45-degree angle. And I just wanted to remind you that the lawn has been in existence for approximately 45 years, and there has been no bluff retreat. I fully support your ilk. However, I think that this is a different situation just because of the lay of the land.
Any other comments while your light is on?
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay. Ms. Larson, you had your light on at one point.
Oh, Mr. Chair, I'm thinking because we can't foresee what's going to happen. No way. But we can plan for what we want to prevent. And so I remember thoroughly many, this is now like institutional memory working here, many landscapes on the bluff that we have been discouraged from putting lawn there. Initially, it was a learning curve for us, and we've learned it. And so I am in full support of Commissioner Jacobs' request for no lawn on the bluff. It's a cautionary tale more than anything else, but I just, that doesn't mean that the neighbor, this case by case could be, oh, okay, lawn here, no lawn for you. But I'm very concerned about the bluff, and I think we have to take that very seriously and be very consistent in what we prescribe. So I am in support of what Commissioner Jacobs proposes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In looking at the preliminary landscape plan, it looks as if it's being pulled back, the lawn is being pulled back 18 inches from where it is now along the bluff line. Mm-hmm. The lawn has been there for 45 years, and you say the landscape, the layers of the geology, instead of sloping down toward the beach, they slope away from the beach. What happens to runoff now? And it looked pretty level to me. Mm-hmm. Does it drain to the street, or what happens to existing rain?
I know just by looking at the topography that no water goes over the bluff. So I'm assuming that it percolates, and because of the geologic formation, it retreats back to the city as opposed to the ocean. I believe there is probably some overland flow to the curb and gutter. But I don't know for sure on that. But I know that none of it goes over the bluff. And we would be willing to, take that lawn edge back 2 feet instead of 18 inches, just to get it away from the bluff top. So, we're here to work with you, not to work against you. but we want to strike a balance.
Thank you.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question's more for Commissioner Larson and Commissioner Jacobs on, I understand exactly where you're going, but then when we talk about consistency and site-by-site application, what exactly are we talking about in terms of how far the lawn should go out from the house and what your feelings are on how far back it should be from where is the bluff, and what that would look like to you as we start to wrangle with this?
Go ahead, Ms. Jacobs.
It's not so much the lawn. It's the water that it takes to keep the lawn green. So it's and staff probably has a better answer to that than I do, but it's almost more of a percentage question than a where does the lawn actually happen. It's the lawn takes a certain amount of water to stay green. So if you have X amount of lawn, then it's going to take so much water. If you have half that much lawn, it's going to take sort of half that much water. I mean, that's not a great explanation, but I would, rather than say how much back from the bluff top, I would rather, and again, staff might have a better suggestion of how we've done it in the past, but to give a kind of percentage, and then when it goes back to the Single Family Design Review Board, because they will actually be looking at more detail in the landscaping plan, to let them refine it with all of their expertise and landscape architects on that board, and paying a special attention to the irrigation required for that particular plant, because it's the water, it's not the plant.
So if we said what's represented on the preliminary plan, if that's 100%, then you would be looking for something that's a percentage less than that 100%, and then let the details be worked out.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be my first run at it.
So what's your feeling on that number?
There's a lot of lawn on there. I'd say you could probably cut it by 50 and still have a nice, healthy piece of lawn in front of that patio to enjoy the
Okay.
bluff top view, and
Okay.
then some low, non-water intensive ground cover to pan out from that. You'd still have something low that kids could run on, and then you get to your lantana and your border plants.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Sudik.
Commissioners. There's also consideration, and I think we can work it out with the Single Family Design Review Board about what type of lawn. If we're eliminating lawn there and cutting it back, we are disturbing the bluff top, because we have to scrape it, we have to plant new plants, and that's digging pits and so on and so forth. I think you understand that. But I think maybe we could work out the percentage with them based on what type of lawn then we choose to use. And I brought my lawn expert here if you have any questions. But there are varieties of lawn that take less water than what is there now. Although what is there now is certainly, it's not even a true species of lawn. There's a blend there, but it is pretty drought tolerant. It's a mix of Kikuyu, Bermuda, and fescue. But I think if it's okay with you, we could work that out with the Single Family Design Review Board and come up with the percentage and the type of lawn.
I would be willing to let the Single Family Design Review Board, if we can condition something that specifies a reduction in irrigation needs and lawn.
And not necessarily put a percentage to the area of lawn. You can use the 50% as a guideline, I think, but because the water would be reduced with the smart irrigation controller, the species of lawn, and different methods, then I think it would be nice to not limit ourselves to 50% reduction in lawn, if that's okay with you.
I'd like to hear other people talk about it, but the other aspect I would like to see is that in all other plantings, that it be temporary irrigation to be removed once the plants are established.
Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Suding, My thought for you and the client, going back to the single-family design board, is perhaps a blending or a compromise from what Commissioner Jacobs has proposed. I'm moving in that direction, but I'd like to find a way to work with you and the client. The lawn has been there a long time. However, we do need to, I think, respect our housing element policy 3.3. That is in our package, and I want to refer us to page 2, section 2, paragraph B. And I just want to briefly read from this because I think this could provide you and the client and the SFDB with some guidance, and that is that a planting of lawns, gardens, etc. should be discouraged, and instead a native vegetation that is drought resistant and that has deep, strong root systems to aid in stabilizing the cliff material should be planted. So if the compromise could be pulling the lawn back and utilizing some of this type of planting, that would, I think, would accomplish and speak to some of the concerns that Commissioner Jacobs has and that I and others have also, but allow them some lawn. We know they're beautiful, and with kids running around, they're fun to play on, etc. But I think we do need to be sensitive to the bluff top area, location of the property, and other larger considerations that we need to take into account. So hopefully your client can work with that, and also the Single Family Design Board, if that sounds reasonable. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Suding brought up something that I was going to, a concern that I have, that if this lawn, which has been there for 45 years, and the plantings that are along the edge are removed, then you're going to be starting all over again and destabilizing the soil. So, and I was thinking of the geologist's report and what he said about the stairway, which looks as if it's getting rid of itself over time, but not to have it taken out because it would mean people going up and down the bluff and more disturbance to the soil and the bluff face. So it's kind of an interesting balance here between doing what is more often expected on a bluff, but this is a lawn that has been there all this time. And again, I'm concerned about disturbing the soil and the roots that are already there. So I don't feel as strongly as Commissioners Schwartz and Jacobs do on the need to reduce the amount of lawn, because I am concerned about that part of it.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let the commission kind of finish up, and then we'll come back to you before we do a motion. Mr. Jordan.
I would agree with Commissioner Lodge on that take also, although I'm in agreement with Commissioner Jacobs too, so I can do my Jekyll and Hyde thing. But to me, the lawn, again, has been there a great period of time. If there was a way to agree on carving it down for a footprint based on where specific issue points are on the bluff right now, so it wasn't a straight line on the bluff, it was a oscillating line maybe, and then that involved native plantings with temporary irrigation, and then the irrigation was pulled. But I would rather just see a little more giveaway back on a straight line, if that's feet or number of feet, and an emphasis put on a smart management towards irrigation and type of grass, and rather than again bring equipment in there and let it disturb and try and start over. But I'm willing to see if there's a compromise on the other side too. So I could go either way on that.
Thank you. Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just clarify and underscore what is for me the bottom line. And here we have a very good photo portrayal of the backyard. I think first and foremost, we do not want to disturb what I believe is bougainvillea when we did our site visit. And from looking at the geologic reports and reading our own policies, we do not want to disturb that part of the cliff's edge. That could be quite detrimental to everything we're trying to accomplish here and to the homeowner. So instead of trying to fashion it up here today, I'm comfortable suggesting we leave it in your hands and with single-family design board, and if you need more studies done, I don't want to financially burden the property owner beyond reason, but some type of a compromise where we're not disturbing the very edge of the bluff. I think that would be very dangerous, but we try to accomplish some of the other measures, again, that are in our own housing policy and that some of the commissioners have concerns about long-term, if that seems reasonable to everyone.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's been some discussion of the possibility of requiring that the irrigation be taken out once the plants are established. I'm thinking back to the last drought, where the only way you could irrigate trees was through an irrigation system. And frankly, I would be opposed to that requirement. We're going to have a drought again, and I want people to be able to save their trees. And it seems to me with the newer kinds of controls on irrigation that they have become so water efficient that I would not be concerned about having the irrigation system in place.
He's also my irrigation controller specialist, so.
Okay, seeing no other lights on, I'd like to chime in on this since I have had the opportunity to work with your lawn and irrigation specialist. I think that there's certain flexibility, and I think what we need to do is establish a threshold at which we're comfortable in terms of the water use, and I think that it should be the native or drought-tolerant landscape as the baseline and let you come up with what alternatives you want. If you want all grass, then perhaps you need to go to native grasses and prove that you're using less water than a native landscape would. Or if you want to keep the lawn that's there, then you reduce the area to the equivalent reduction in water. So I've heard the number of 50%. I'd be willing to go with a baseline of what you establish as native landscape as being that threshold, and then you compare your alternative to it. I'm willing to go there. I don't want to tie your hands. I'd prefer to see you work with the design board with the intent that we're not going to exceed that which we could do with a native landscape. So that would be the direction that I would like to go, and not get into you have to remove the irrigation or there's a certain limitation on area. Let you have the creativity, and it's the water use that we're concerned with, and you figure out how to get there with the design board. So that would be my direction, and I'd like to see if somehow that can get factored into our decision here today.
Would you like to hear a little bit more from Kim True on the baseline drought tolerant and the...
I think that would be helpful for the other commissioners. I'm pretty familiar with it, and that's why I wanted to put forward that recommendation, but I think she could portray what the options are and what the numbers are, too.
Okay. I'll hand it over to Kim True.
Kim True, Suiting Design. I'm a landscape architect. And I guess first with where we started, what's proposed on the plan now is a SmartLine ET controller, and that has an on-site weather station, and they're finding that those are reducing water use by 24 to 28% consistently, and that's from the Marin Water District. So right there, right off the bat, you have the ability to reduce the existing water use. Also, by reducing the lawn area that we have, we're about, what you see on the plan now is about a 50% reduction of water use on that bluff top over what is there today. So if we're going to go further beyond that, we do have some options of the UC Verde buffalo grass, which is a native grass. It's been used out at the university, and that might be a good choice for this lawn area, because I think when you see the view from the house out to the ocean, it is nice to have that soft area of a lawn, the usable space, and that type of lawn uses, I believe it's 75% less water than a typical fescue lawn, and 30 to 40% less water than a Bermuda grass lawn. So we're seeing the ability to have a substantial reduction in water use with a combination of plant type, the new smart irrigation controllers, and again with a weather station right here on the site, so it's picking up the fog moisture and it's reducing everything. And I've installed one of these on my own yard, and I can't believe I've 20% reduction, and I already strained things pretty tightly. So I think we can really achieve your goals. And there are a number of coastal native plants that would be nice in that area, but still achieving that look of having that expansive lawn and that aesthetic that the owners.
And I
Looking
believe
for.
that species of native grass or lawn is much more deeply rooted as well.
That's correct. That's correct. And the installation of it, you can spray this site and it comes in plugs, and you just drill in a 2-inch hole and plant these plugs. So you don't have to actually scrape and remove the existing lawn. So that's another benefit to switching to that type of plant material.
Great. Well, thank you for clearing that up, at least knowing what the options are.
A couple of quick last things. The owner does let the lawn grow long now, which actually does encourage some deep rooting. And you were all up there on Tuesday. You saw how green the lawn is. He has not watered that lawn in 2 months. So right there, I mean, you know, we're working towards that baseline that Chair Bartlett is talking about, and I think that's an excellent approach. We'll establish a baseline and work backward from there.
Okay. I'd like to hear from my other commissioners and see if we have residents here so we can move it along. Ms. Schwartz.
Can we talk about the front of the property for a few minutes? We've been focusing on the back, and
Where the work is?
where the work is,
Right,
and
okay.
I have some questions about tree removal and
Okay.
want to get to that topic if
All
we
right,
could.
good.
Is this a good time for that?
That'd be perfect.
Okay, excellent. My understanding from our site visit is that the Pittosporum and the liquid amber tree in the front are proposed to be removed for reconfiguration, rerouting of the driveway.
Correct.
Is that because the proposed renovation to the house will reconfigure the desired front, and that's where they want to shift the entrance to what I'll call to the right or the east? There's the Pittosporum, I
Right.
believe, and then the liquid amber's behind it, although the avocado tree will stay, I believe.
And I don't know actually that I'm the right one to answer that question.
And the
so-
reason I bring this up is, unless a tree is diseased or it's problematic in another way, I really like to see tree removal minimized on properties in the city.
We are replacing it with 2 more trees, and I think one of the reasons I may stand corrected, but I think one of the reasons that the owner wishes to change the configuration there is to have a little bit of a shorter driveway too. But I don't. Yeah. This is Mr. Ron Brawl, the owner.
I think the only reason we did that was it was the only way to sustain a 1-story house with the setbacks and still to be able to kind of keep it at 1 story. That was a big concern, not to go 2-story and kind of stay within the lot. And if I can add one thing with the lawn, we did turn it off 2 months ago, and we do leave the front much longer just so we get deep roots. But I was surprised myself when I first bought the property how green it stays just from the morning mist, just with that. After 2 months, you guys saw how green it was during a site visit. So,
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, Commissioner Bartlett and
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz, I just wanted to note for the record that the Parks and Recreation Commission has approved the removal of those trees, so it is something that they looked at and considered.
Okay. And I would like to hear from the other commissioners, too, about the modification request, just to make sure we're all on board with that. I know we've focused our attention on the back lawn, so.
After the
Ms.
back
Ms.
lawn, the modification's
Ms.
fine.
Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The house was built when the side yard setback was 5 feet, and it has changed to 6 feet, so it would seem quite unjust to not grant
Great.
the modification.
I just wanted to make sure we could air that so that we could all hear it. Mr. Jordan.
Likewise with me, and I, again, appreciative of the fact that it is a modification request to match up what's existing there, and it's only a 1-story request. And just to get my 2 cents back in on the trees, I'm obviously in that neighborhood frequently, and I do view both that tree on the front and the tree that adjoins the neighbors as at least perceiving to be overgrown and invasive. One into the sidewalk and one into, if I was your neighbor, I'd be looking for some relief there too. So I think it is appropriate to remove those trees and replace them in kind.
Great, thank you. Ms. Larson.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. So do you have a Cobra head?
No, I don't
Okay.
think so. I don't.
Just checking.
No. Ms. Jacobs.
Just as you're asking for kind of cleanup on the other issues, I find no other problems with the project. The design is nice. The address of the street is in keeping with the other houses. The design is attractive. I appreciate it that you kept to one story. It's always a benefit to the neighborhood when you can keep more or less to the one story because you're near a beautiful view and a beautiful space, and you did that and still created a lovely house. So I have no objections to the property nor the setback. My only objection is to the amount of irrigation that will be required for a lawn. And that's it.
Mr. Jordan, your light is still on? Okay. Ms. Lodge?
Are we ready for a motion?
I'm ready.
Well, I move to approve a coastal development permit for 163 La Jolla Drive to allow the proposed development and the modification and adopt the conditions that are in the staff report and make a recommendation when the project goes back to the design review board that every effort be made to reduce future water use.
Second?
Okay. Any further discussion? I would like to, clarify the motion that we use the native and drought tolerant as being the baseline and then give the applicant any flexibility to stay there or below the baseline.
And I would add that to my motion then that you use the baseline step that would be established if it was all drought tolerant plants.
Great.
Could we, Mr. Chair, could we further specify that it be included in the conditions of approval under A, design review, number 4, irrigation system, that be where we indicate the baseline, identification of a baseline for current irrigation needs, and that be maintained?
If that would be fine with the maker of the motion?
That's fine.
Under
Put it in a particular
A4?
place.
Okay.
I'll re-second that motion.
Any
With
further
the
discussion?
revisions.
Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure I understand that as you just explained it, I like your version of maintaining that baseline, but that would apply to the entire grass area on the preliminary landscape plan. Is that our intent?
I believe that's the concern of the commission, is
Okay.
the bluff top portion, especially within the 75-foot retreat line.
Right. Okay. Then I would support that too, and I would support your version of maintaining that baseline.
And Mr. Chair, I guess
Ms.
just
Lodge.
add that is my main concern, but it's clear from looking at the preliminary landscape plan that an effort has been made in that direction all the way around.
Yes. Okay, if there's no further discussion, I'll call for the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. You have a project, and it's appealable within 10 days, and thanks for your patience on the explanation. So,
You're welcome. Thank you.
okay, our last item is discussion item number 4, which is 601 East Mitchell-Terranas Street, and this is the cottage workforce housing construction update. I will need to recuse myself as I am currently under contract with Cottage Hospital on their Goleta Valley facility, so I will be stepping down and having Ms. Jacobs chair the balance of the meeting, and Ms. Larson, I think you're recusing yourself as
Yes,
well.
Mr. Chair, I am. Thank you. My husband's in the employ of Cottage Hospital.
Great. So give us a second to shift seats, and good luck with the balance of the meeting.
So, seeing that we have the representatives from the Cottage Workforce Housing Project in the room, it looks like we're all ready. We have our staff presentation ready to go. I would like to try to keep the presentation to about 15 minutes, and if there are commission questions, we can elaborate further on particular details. And if there's anyone in the audience who has come to make public comment on this item, please get a green slip and fill it out and give it to Mr. Cato. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioners. As noted, this is a 6-month construction update for the Cottage Workforce Housing Project. It's located at 601 East Mitchell-Terena Street, and that's bordered by Arriaga, Mitchell-Terena, and California Streets, the actual construction site. And this is how it looked prior to the demolition of the hospital building. The project involves the demolition of the hospital, which has already taken place, and the construction of 115 residential condominiums and associated parking. You may remember that an EIR was prepared for this project, and it did identify quite a few construction-related impacts, which is why we're doing this 6-month update for the Commission. Briefly, the project was approved by the Planning Commission in September 2006. That approval was upheld by the City Council in December 2006. The maps for the project have recently been recorded. The site preparation activities began in March of this year, and the demolition began in May of this year. Construction is anticipated to begin in just a few weeks. Ideally, I believe December 6th now is the date for construction to begin, and it would last until August of 2012. Staff does receive weekly monitoring reports from the project environmental coordinator, and these reports summarize the project's compliance with required mitigation measures, ongoing monitoring by other consultants, and identify any other complaints or issues that have been raised. The significant impacts identified in the EIR were related to noise, and potentially significant impacts related to dust, vibration, and construction truck traffic were also identified. So far, the complaints that have been received relate primarily to noise, dust, and construction traffic. Although these complaints have been received, staff does find that the applicant has responded appropriately to those complaints and has made changes at the site as needed. In addition to the noise, air quality, and traffic, the project does require ongoing monitoring related to cultural resources, tree protection, water quality, and solid waste. And these are all outlined in the PEC's weekly reports. And one final note, an underground storage tank was found at the site during demolition activities. And County Fire is currently working with the applicant to get a site assessment report and corrective action plan approved and in place. The tank itself has been removed from the site already. And I can answer any questions about that if you have any. And then one thing I did want to note for the public as well as the Planning Commission is that this hearing was publicly noticed, and we are not planning to notice future meetings. It was done as a courtesy, and unless the Planning Commission really wants these meetings to be noticed, we would not do that formal notice. I also wanted to note that the applicant does hold their own neighborhood meetings, and those are also held every 6 months, and they correspond fairly closely with this Planning Commission 6-month update. We're anticipating that the next updates would be held in May 2011, November 2011, and then the final one would be May 2012, assuming construction does wrap up by August of 2012. In conclusion, staff doesn't recommend any changes to the project conditions at this point. The monitoring will continue on a weekly basis throughout the demolition, excavation, grading, and footing installation. And once those activities are completed, the PEC's monitoring or reports to the city would come every 2 weeks rather than weekly. That concludes staff's report, and I can answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take commissioner questions, but before that I want to ask, is there an applicant presentation? Okay, but you're here for questions. Thank you. Ms. Schwartz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. DeBus, could you comment further on why you are recommending that we would not provide public notice on future update meetings pertaining to this project?
Sure, Commissioner Schwartz, it's primarily a money issue, and if you felt that noticing the meetings was important, it's something that perhaps we could talk with the applicant about being reimbursed for.
Is that a course of action, maybe this is to educate me, is that a course of action that we would take on other significant project update activities that come before the Commission? Since we've had a number of project updates this year, and they, to my knowledge, they have been noticed, I'm wondering why we would depart on this one, especially with the significant neighborhood interests and impacts.
Commissioner Schwartz, as I said, it is something that if the Commission believes is important, we can absolutely keep doing it. We would just request that the applicant reimburse the city for the cost of that notice.
Okay. Madam Chair, when do you think we might want to discuss that when we get into the comment portion of our... Mr. Vincent, did you have any thoughts for us on that matter?
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, first off, there's no legal requirement for that kind of noticing for these kinds of updates. Looking at the audience today with the notice, and as Commissioner Schwartz noted, there is absolutely strong neighborhood interest in this project, yet the noticing hasn't seemed to bring anyone here. So from a cost effectiveness standpoint, I think the neighborhood knows that this project's going on. The neighborhood is very aware of the project. And the other point I would only make is that the Planning Commission agenda itself is noticed, and I know for a fact that there are interested members of that neighborhood who follow our agendas very, very closely. And so all of that goes to just a practical reality that interested members of this neighborhood know about this what the Planning Commission does.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent. I'm comfortable with that.
Just by way of explanation, how many people do get noticed for a cottage event? Is it in the hundreds because it's the entire neighborhood around that property?
Commissioner Jacobs, many of the conditions that were applied to this project include a specific notice radius of, I believe it's 1,000 feet, which is much higher than our standard legal notice, which is 300 feet. So when Cottage does the noticing for their neighborhood meetings, that is a 1,000-foot radius.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, my only other question perhaps set of questions pertains to the underground storage tank that you found in August and the plan that's underway to, I think, identify or evaluate the soil and groundwater, and then if there's remediation required. And do we have a sense of that timeline at this point? Or is just the process has just begun and we won't know what that timeline is? Because my understanding would be that has to occur first before other construction can begin, or is that correct?
Commissioner Schwartz, the soil contamination that was found was fairly limited to the site where the storage tank itself was located. And the applicant has already submitted their site assessment plan and corrective action plan to County Fire. So County Fire is in the process of reviewing it. So all of the soil sampling and those sorts of things have already taken place. So I expect that we'll have an approved plan from the county very soon.
Before construction starts? Do you know what the
I don't know the
related
exact
timing
date
is?
of when they'll get it to us. I believe they have a 30-day public review period.
Yes.
So that would need to conclude.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schwartz. Ms. Lodge?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having lived through 2 months of a single-family home and swimming pool being destroyed and removed next door to me, I am astounded at how few complaints there are connected with the removal of a very large building or group of buildings. I've talked to friends who live in the neighborhood, and they've had no complaints. I frequently go by the site. So as far as I've been able to tell, they've been doing what they're supposed to do, and have managed to get all that material that had to be removed out of there in a remarkably good fashion.
Thank you, Ms. Lodge. Commissioner Jordan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would echo Commissioner Lodge's comments and actually not be astounded, but congratulate both staff and the project management team at the low level of complaints. Having been an avid spectator as that was running up through the process and that neighborhood was running the streets with pitchforks pretty much, I think the end result are a pat on the back. On the question of noticing, though, Ms. DeBusk, I'm just curious, do you have just a quick recap on not related to noticing for updates, but what type of ongoing outreach still takes place to the neighborhoods, particularly as it may reference any high-intensity construction activities? Does that still go on an ongoing basis?
There's no formal requirement and no formal process that I'm aware of where the applicant has been notifying the neighborhood of certain peak construction activities. They do have a website, and I'm not sure how often that's updated, but perhaps the applicant can address that question a little bit better.
Okay. Or
So if you could please state your name. Thank you.
Recycled material as a result of the demolition process on the site. So we're really talking about that. At this point, we're, at least as far as the underground storage tank is concerned, we are expecting the review by the fire department within the next week or so. And then, as Mr. Buss stated, there's a 30-day notice provision. And then we'll probably have of only diesel contaminated soil in early January. And so it's likely that we will not start major grading activities until that is at least started. We understand it'll take about 3 or 4 days to remove the soil. It's not excessively contaminated, and I think we've been working collaboratively with the fire department to, do whatever we need to do from the consultant standpoint to provide information to them. Unfortunately, it's taken a little longer than we expected, but at this point we have to work within the process, and we intend to do so.
Super. Well, I'm happy to drag you up so there's a face to congratulate rather than just nobody there. But I agree with you that compared to the amount of rhetoric that led up to the project versus the amount of conversation you see now of complaints, it's been a job well done. So thanks.
Thank you, and my team deserves the congratulations. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions that I can answer?
Ms. Schwartz, is your question for Mr. Biscaro, or
Just waiting for comments.
ready for comments? I do have one question.
Sure.
My question is about architectural salvage. There were some items that were identified to be saved, and I think there were some lamps, some statues, and I wanted to ask how those are doing and where they might be.
Well, the statues that were part of the hospital were all sort of essentially given back to the sisters, either in Illinois or the sisters that were here. As you may have seen in the public, I think all the sisters have now moved to other locations, but I'm sure they've taken the statutories with them. So beyond that, we had to salvage the roof tiles, and we did a pretty good job in salvaging, I think, about 40-some-odd thousand tiles that are now stored in Goleta and will be used on the project site. With respect to the various roofing requirements that we have, we're actually working with two types of roof, more traditional roofing and also tile roofing. And so we've also salvaged some of the sandstone walls where appropriate, and those are either still in place or will be salvaged as we need to at the end here. So those are the general requirements that we've had, and I think we've been able to comply with that. And more importantly, I think we've got water erosion in place, water erosion control in place now as well. So if we do have rainy issues that occur, I think we'll be able to handle that well. That was a concern that the neighbors expressed at our last meeting a few weeks ago. So I think we're in good shape there as well.
Thank you. I did drive around the site this morning, and boy, it's gone. It's if you haven't driven by, take a drive by. It is it's all cleaned up, and those are some really big trucks hauling stuff out of there.
And I must say, once we start, just so the commission knows, we'll come back to you, of course, in 6 months. We'll be well on our way, probably building parking structures by then. We expect the project will take about 20 months to complete once we start. So a couple of months of grading, 2 to 3 months of grading. Hopefully we won't have too much rain issue. And then we're into the lower part and the upper part at the same time. So we're building one continuous project, sort of in micro phases, if you will. And we're at the final throes of getting our permits here from the city as well. So we're very excited.
And I would guess your next neighborhood meeting is going to be about the caissons that are going to be for the parking structures. That's going to be very noisy.
I don't think we'll use caissons. It'll be poured in place concrete. So so it shouldn't be too noisy. I think it's really more about truck trips now, moving stuff in and out during that early time, moving dirt around, some noise from the diesel trucks, and we're using biodiesel as well in compliance with the conditions. So I think we're doing everything we can to sort of work with it, and our PEC is very astute, and the city gets the reports every week. So we're right on it. So.
Very good.
Thank you.
We're going to go to commissioner comments now, unless there's any comments from the public. Did we get any green slips?
We have it, but I did want to remind you to make sure to open public comment just in case.
Yes, I will open public comment now. Anyone from the public wishing to speak, this is the moment. And seeing no one come forward, I will then close public comment and the matters to the commission for comments. Ms. Schwartz, I believe you had your light on first, and then we'll go to Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to start my comments first specific to the Bella Riviera Development Company on behalf of, I think, Cottage Health System, Cottage Hospital. And I think you and the team have not only done an admirable job, but from my perspective, a role model job as a developer owner. We have 17 monitoring conditions outlined in our packet, and to have the scale of redevelopment going on in that very constrained neighborhood, and as Commissioner Jordan mentioned, with a great deal of concern at the outset of this project some years ago now, to have had so few complaints come in and you respond in such a timely and effective way, I think really sets the tone for what can be accomplished in our city. And then my more general comment is back to the 17 monitoring conditions. While I know that some might view these as a burden, as a financial burden, a cost of doing business burden in the city, I want to say that on balance, I think it's important to recognize that adhering to these types of environmental conditions, and that's dust and noise and separating recycle from other waste and properly transporting them off the property to appropriate destinations, is what makes Santa Barbara the environmentally beautiful place. So we can't have the beautiful place without a great deal of vigilance, and that sometimes comes with cost in doing business. So I appreciate that Cottage and Bella Riviera has stepped up and been such a good partner in a sense with the city. And I'm quite confident that the neighborhood will really embrace the project once it's completed and we have the employees in there. Workforce housing is so greatly needed in our city. So I thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a question for Mr. Biscaro. City staff, Ms. DeBusk referred to an August 2012 completion date. Is that still what you are expecting, given the discovery of the tank and delays caused by removing that soil?
I believe it'll be a little bit later than that, but from the day we start our grading activities, it'll be about 20 months. So at this point, knowing we have the mitigation plan notice provision, we've decided to sort of hold back on grading activities, because if we started grading within 2 weeks, we'd be hitting the contaminated soil, which would delay the project probably by at least a month. So we're exercising more caution than we otherwise would. We just got a report yesterday from the fire department, and we will proceed with the project as soon as we are permitted, of course, subject to at least starting the mitigation of the soil activities, which probably won't happen until early January based on yesterday's information late in the afternoon. And so from that point on, we can count about 20 months. So from mid-January to 20 months from then, it should be August, September of 2012. We are going to be speaking to the city as well about phasing the project in terms of releasing units. And so it's our hope that we'll have affordable and market units available by the latter part of 2011. And so that is our goal, and we believe that's feasible if we begin with the upper level of the project and work our way down. The parking structures are really the critical path. And so our hope is that we have units available to our employees. In fact, right now at 2 o'clock, we're actually meeting with our human resources people to begin the planning of how we're going to work with our employees on a daily basis. So it's really exciting for us, for the VRE, the Villa Riviera Real Estate Company, and of course Cottage Health System to be moving in this direction. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, it does.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no really other accolades. I think I've said them already, but based on that timeline that was just given to, I'd love to suggest to staff that they invite us for a field trip sometime next year. It's always important to me, at least with projects like this, like the airport, like Cottage proper, to while you're standing in line at the supermarket and people ask you what the heck were you thinking, that you're able to have some sort of advocacy that's a little more tangible, because you got to go out there and see it and touch it and feel it and trip over things. And so I would hope that sometime next year when it's appropriate and you can safely take us out there, that we'd be invited out.
Okay, seeing no further lights on, I would just reiterate the exemplary job that the Cottage has done. The team has been outstanding. The sound wall is working great, and I especially want to comment on the construction site signage. It's not something that is very sexy or glorious, but it is really well done. It has contact numbers that can be called 24/7, broken down by noise complaints, dust complaints. It's very complete and very accessible to the neighborhood. And I have not seen signage that good anywhere else in our community, and you really need to be commended for that, because many developers hide behind the phone tree phone number or the answering machine phone number, and people say, well, I called to complain and I didn't get anybody. You guys did the real thing. You put up a real contact number, and it's clear and easy to find. So thank you for doing that. And just a note to staff that would be the standard that we would hope for all future projects. And then regarding notice, I can understand why we don't want to send out 1,000-foot notice for every future report, but I would ask that we identify neighborhood groups, housing associations, and notice them every single time. And I'm sure they will spread the news, and then we will be getting at least one more aspect out there to the public. Seeing no further comment on this issue, I'm going to close this agenda item and move on to our administrative agenda. For committee and liaison reports. And our staff hearing officer liaison is Ms. Larson, and she is absent for this part of the meeting, so we will postpone the staff hearing liaison report till next time, and I will ask if anyone has a other committee or liaison report to share with the commission. Okay, Ms. Lodge.
Thank you. There are a couple of slides that I brought from the Water Commission. I showed them previous month to commissioners, but I thought it would be nice if I could scan them and get them up there where everybody could see them. I should have brought in the picture that I took from the courthouse tower of the bare lot where St. Francis used to be.
It is one impressive vacant lot.
It really is. Yeah, I was up there on some other errand and looked over there and I wondered, what is that big bare piece of dirt doing up there? And then I realized it was where St. Francis had been. Oh, wow.
Hopefully when 2011 rolls to a
It
close.
says something about water on that.
Finding it? Okay.
Well, I'll go ahead with another part that is not related to the graph. There's been discussion at the Water Commission of working on the pass-through agreement and completing that. And I was listening and I was thinking, gee, was that what I worked on 20 years ago? And I checked with staff, and indeed it was. There is an act called the Warren Act, which does not allow any local water to be passed through or stored in federal facilities. Kachuma is, of course, a federal facility. And this was before the vote on which the importation of state water was approved by the voters. But we also were having issues with Gibraltar filling with silt, and the city was unable to continue to store as much water, and it spilled and went down into Kachuma, which had often excess capacity. So I went on a lobbying campaign to Congress, and I came across the letters that I sent at the time last night. And I met with Congressman Miller and then Senator Alan Cranston's office staff, and we did get an amendment made which allowed the water to be passed through from Gibraltar, water that spills into Kachuma, and then using that federal facility and Tecolote Tunnel and the distribution system on this side of the mountains, we got them to, we were able to use those to bring our water here. That is an agreement, and a contract was signed with all the member agencies of Kachuma Kachuma Conservation and Release Board, and it was sat there until it was triggered by the need, as Gibraltar filled up even more, to put it into effect. And I was really surprised by this, but I knew that the Gibraltar had lost capacity as a result of the Zaka fire and all the silt and ash that got washed into it after the fire. It's lost 22% of its capacity, went down from 6,800 acre feet to 5,300 acre feet. And so it's become time for this agreement to be put into effect. But it really seemed like a case of deja vu all over again for me. Were you able to find it?
Commissioner Lodge, I have your little thumb drive plugged in, but I don't see anything that says water in it. If you look up on does this look familiar to you at all?
Is the thumb drive showing up there?
Yeah, this is it. Is this the right thumb drive?
Perhaps not.
No, this doesn't. It is the one that you gave to us, but I don't.
Okay, I'm sorry. I gave you the wrong one. Well, that's too bad. What the Water Commission has also been discussing is system demand projections based on Plan Santa Barbara. And there are things happening aside from whatever the city is doing that despite the additional growth that will come with Plan Santa Barbara and the additional 2,800 units and somewhere between 1 and 2 million acre feet of non-residential development, there would be a straight line going up like this normally. But the state has adopted plumbing codes, revised plumbing codes that change to all toilets from in new construction and any remodels from 1.6 gallons per flush to 1.28 gallons per flush, and that almost brings it down to a straight line. It's really amazing. There's some other water efficiencies. There's federal law relating to water efficiencies in washing machines, which also help. There is a line where there's also the state 20 by 2020, because of the water shortage statewide, was decided to codify a policy of 20% reduction in water use by 2020. And that involves well, for Santa Barbara, we're supposed to get down to 117 gallons per day, and now we're at 123 gallons per day. Before the drought, when we were using 16,000 acre feet of water a year, it was 163 gallons per day. So there would be an allowance during drought years for higher usage per person per day because trees need to be kept alive. There is an even further conservation effort where, if it became necessary, where we'd add rebates for irrigation system improvements, where someone had an older irrigation system and something like the system that was just discussed in the project on La Jolla would replace an older one that uses more water. And remember, there were comments about how someone had made those changes, and just changing the system immediately got between a 20 and 25% reduction in water use in landscape irrigation. There also could be incentives for installation of cisterns, for gray water systems, and the use of mulch. Mulch is very effective in keeping water use down in terms of landscaping. So the end result is that with those, and even with the growth, we would end up we could conceivably end up using even less water than we are now. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Ms. Lodge. It's amazing what the technology can accomplish, all with no inconvenience. It's just amazing. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Absolutely nothing to report, but as you know, Commissioner Justice is on the injured reserve list today, and I just thought it would be appropriate, I'm sure, as all of you would join me in wishing him a rapid recovery and a return very soon, and hope he's doing well.
I would certainly second that. Yes. Actually, other reasons to make note of our fellow commissioners on the positive side, it is Mr. Bartlett's birthday. If you get a chance to wish him a happy birthday, please do. And I believe there's also a celebration for our mayor, Helene Schneiders, having a birthday party for the whole town. I think it's at the Libero, and celebrating her birthday too. So there must be some alignment of the stars for leadership that happens on the 18th of November. I do have a report from the 101 Design Review Team. You'll remember a few weeks ago the 101 in Motion brought a report to the Planning Commission. There are two aspects of that program that are being redesigned because they've hit snags in various ways. One is the underpass that goes under the Union Pacific Bridge at Cabrillo, and the other is the on-ramp at Salinas. And the design review team got the same report that the commission did, so I won't go into it in great detail. But the site visit and so on that we made with Caltrans at the Salinas off-ramp is especially space constrained. There's probably not going to be a really easy solution to that problem. There will be a loss of landscaping, and the median will be reduced from a very nicely landscaped median to, at present, a 3-foot-high metal bar. So that one is going to take some every bit of expertise on the design review board, and we will be working hard on it. But that is in progress, and we'll keep you apprised of how that goes. They're on a kind of a fast track in an effort to save money to try and get the Salinas on-ramp configured while the trucks and the construction crews are in that part of the project. So stay tuned for more on that. And I think that brings our meeting to conclusion. Anything else? All right. So have a great evening and good night.